Welcome to Built to Finish. I'm your host, Stephen Pivnik. Join me each week as we explore the journeys of audacious goal setters. This includes experienced founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing pivotal moments that propel their success. We'll also be talking with endurance athletes who push the limits of physical and mental ability. This show is brought to you by Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services to help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Built to Finish podcast. Today's guest is an entrepreneur with 30 years of experience in launching and scaling startups in the tech sector. I'm excited to speak with him about his journey and the impact he's making in the world of payments. He is also a non-executive director at the fundraising regulator, helping to promote ethical fundraising practices in the UK. Beyond that, he is an expert in open banking, strategy, and new business development with a track record of building innovative and scalable businesses. He is also the co-host of the Wonderful podcast. He currently serves as the CEO and co-founder of Wonderful. Kieron James, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Great to have you here. You have a ton of experience for a lot of our listeners in the entrepreneurial space in terms of scaling and then later selling businesses. So first question I'd love to start off with is, when it came time to selling some of the companies that you were involved with, what were some of the best strategies that you put into place to really maximize the exit for all the stakeholders?
It's a really great question, and one you kind of find out oftentimes late to the game in terms of considering it. And it's one of the bits of advice that I now give people having been through that experience, which is even before you start thinking about setting up a business, if your plan is long-term to exit, be thinking about that on day one. And it can seem like a bit of overkill when you're really excited about this new business venture, and everything that has to offer in terms of your life and filling the day. But actually getting those bits and pieces right from the get-go are really, really important. I want to say those bits and pieces. I guess what I'm really referring to is almost creating the same kind of data room that you might when you're trying to attract investors from the beginning for thinking about the exit. So all those contracts, those bits of paperwork, make sure they're all filed away somewhere digitally these days rather than a filing cabinet, turning back the clock many, many years. But somewhere where you can put your hands on them quickly, because that whole due diligence process that you come to when someone makes that offer is made so much easier if you've given that some forethought. And I say the starting point is really day one, probably even prior to incorporating. If you're going to incorporate your business, just be thinking about the structure, thinking about how the whole thing's going to work from an exit point of view. So, for me, that was a lesson learned with probably the first one that we did. Not that it was particularly onerous, but there were things that, having done a couple since, we put right the second time around and just made sure we got all of that data to hand.
I love that advice. So I have a term called always be closing, and always be closing typically refers to deals. I refer to always be closing as your books, right? So have all your corporate governance and so organized so that you're always ready for due diligence, because you never know when opportunity knocks, right?
Exactly.
It could be a new banking relationship that you need all of a sudden. It could be a new customer or vendor that's coming on board that wants to dive a little bit deeper than most. So if you have that process in place, you're going to save yourself so much stress in the long run.
And I think that it's moved on, Steve, so much from those early days. I remember, literally talking about that being analog and being in filing cabinets and just making sure they were all alphabetized. But now there's so much technology out there to make this whole process so much easier. We probably started off with Dropbox, but now if you think about it, you can get a lot more sophisticated in how you're storing things as well in terms of how they're going to be accessed in the future. So yeah, make use of that technology.
Agreed. Totally agreed. So when you've gone through multiple due diligence processes, what was some of the bigger surprises that you encountered that you probably could have avoided had you given it a little bit more attention earlier on?
I think it's the little things. Like, I remember one of them that caught us out was just the agreement that we had on our water cooler in the office. And it sounds like such a crazy thing. It certainly was never going to be a deal breaker, but it's when you stopped and asked, what's the duration of the contract on that? And ours was 36 months and probably had about 18 left to run. And not significant, not going to stop a deal, but it's just all of that. And it's the the level of detail that you're going to need to get into and those questions that need to be asked about every contract that you've got with everybody and how that's shaping up. I think the other one as well is, and again, this sounds glaringly obvious, I guess, to people that have been through it, but thinking about the contract terms that you've got with your customers, thinking about any exposure from having a handful of very large ones that are then very dominant in terms of your revenue, trying to protect yourself against that as you grow. And that's always quite challenging because obviously no one wants to turn away an inquiry from a large customer, but at the same time, you've got to try and balance that in terms of your overall portfolio. So I guess they were probably two of the key ones that the minutiae on one hand, and on the other hand, that kind of customer profile that you've got in terms of where your revenue's derived from.
Good advice. So in terms of leadership teams, I know this is one topic, a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. They have people that have been with them from the beginning, and they were probably a fantastic fit for, the early stage of the company. But then as the company continued to scale, they became, less of a, perfect fit. And then there's a whole bunch of, drama that sometimes ensues in terms of, having to, part ways and bring on a more experienced individual for that specific role. Have you faced those specific challenges with, people that you founded the company with and then later on had to part ways with?
Yeah, I guess to an extent, it's always a tricky one because we've tended to start literally from the ground up. So it'll be businesses that I've formed in a dining room with me, and then you bring people in. And of course, you want to give everybody an opportunity to grow from within the organization. So to leave those doors open for promotion, it's leaving them open enough to give yourself the room as well, as you quite rightly pointing out there, Steve. Probably things like job titles and equity in the business are things to consider really carefully to make sure that you can, you're giving that person the opportunity to grow into a role, but also giving yourself the opportunity to promote, to bring in above them and have them answer to somebody new with more experience. And I think that extends right down to, up to the CEO of the organization. There comes a time in an organization's growth when it might well be time just to step aside and let somebody with more experience of running a listed company, for example, take over because, a lot of founders don't have that experience and it's a completely different skill set. So, it's about being pragmatic, about being realistic. But also I think we've always tried to make that opportunity exist. We don't want people to join and think there's nowhere to go. And right the way through to recognizing that a role that someone joined the organization, the title they joined with may actually vary significantly from where they end up. Even in terms of the job function that they're doing, we've had people that come in with educational experience in zoology, in marine biology, and then do marketing jobs or product management jobs and so forth. So I think really working on people's skills and their attributes is super important from both sides, from the employer and the employee. So regular appraisals, figuring out what people want to do and how they do it best is really quite important.
Yeah, agreed. Open communication on, career trajectories and performance is really important because that helps eliminate a lot of potential stress and, becoming passive aggressive with individual or just getting, stressed out because if there wasn't the proper communication, bi-directionally, there definitely is a opportunity for greater stress than there should be.
Yeah. And I think that's very typical in startup life where it's inherently stressful anyway. So yeah, anything you can do to alleviate that. And it's always one of those things, it's always a lot easier to say these things than to do them. So you've got to try hard to live by those words too. Not always easy. And don't beat yourself up too much if you find that there are weeks that are particularly stressful. It's just going to happen. It's just always trying to learn from that and move on.
Yep. Roll with the punches and keep going.
Yeah.
Speaking of stressful, so obviously the due diligence process is often stressful on organizations. I like to tell people that it's almost a double full-time job because you still have to keep your eye on the ball, run the company as if no transaction is happening, while at the same time focusing in on the transaction because it's strategic and it's really important. In your experiences, when did you let people in on the fact that there was a process going on, that there was due diligence, and like how far did that veil spread in terms of just letting people into the tent, allowing them to understand what was happening?
I think we're probably atypical in that we tend to be super transparent with everything that we're doing, literally everything. So the stuff is at a level where in terms of its size, we can communicate that. The team's pretty small, so we've always been able to do that. We've tended to scale up and exit fairly rapidly. So we've never had teams of 60, 70, 80, 100 and so on. At the point that we've exited, it's tended to be smaller than that, which allows those communication channels to be more direct and straightforward. Typically as well, most of the people in the organization, in fact, I'm thinking about the previous couple of exits, they've all had, I'm going to say this, I don't want to say this, I'm going to correct myself, but I think typically people have had options in the businesses as well. So they've had it, they've had a vested interest in knowing what's going on. So for us, I think probably, if anything, I criticize myself for oversharing and just giving people too much information. Thankfully, it's not bitten us yet. I think people have tended to respond very well to that within the company.
If it works, there's absolutely no reason to change it, right? So some people, there are two schools of thought, right? Either, share very, very little until the very end, or share as much as possible and be completely transparent. And that just builds such an incredible amount of trust with the founder and then the leadership team that if you continue to share, then there aren't going to be any surprises.
No, I think that's right. And again, when that trust is there, then you've got people helping solve the problems that you might encounter along the way. Whether it is that, can someone dig out the water cooler contract for me and check where we are with that? Then you're going to get that support if people see that as potentially scuppering a deal or whatever else. So I think it does work both ways. But I can understand in a larger organization, it's sometimes more difficult to make sure that message is as clear as you want it to be. It gets diluted along the way and confused, and people then get, fearful about their futures and so on. So it needs to be handled sensitively and appropriately, depending on your own approach to your management and your team and communications generally. I think you shouldn't deviate from what you would normally do in that situation.
Yeah, it becomes even a little bit more challenging in today's virtual environment where you want to share, but you can't really participate in the water cooler talk because there is no water cooler, right? So you can't run into people, calm their fears, allay their concerns and things like that. So it becomes a little bit more challenging to be as transparent as you probably would have been had, everybody been in the same facility.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's right. Those challenges brought up by more remote working are very evident. I mean, there are clearly lots and lots of advantages, but you're completely right about that water cooler scenario. And the same just in terms of, pulling up a seat to somebody's desk and solving a problem together in that non-formal, let's schedule a meeting kind of way is just so helpful and missed. It's one thing that I definitely miss. We use, many people use Slack. We use Discord for a lot of the communications within the business, and very often I'll just say, let's have a video call rather than just have a chat dialogue, because it's so much easier to communicate when you're looking at somebody. But it's still not the same.
No, agreed. So I'm sure a lot of your businesses in the past were more traditional in terms of in-person type employment, and they've moved to virtual. So what is your current thought? Like if you were to start another company tomorrow, would you start it virtually to get the best talent possible, anywhere? Or would you go to more the traditional route and get people to report into an office?
What a great question. And it was so easy to answer that with the hybrid approach. But you see, I'm not even convinced that's a great solution so often. And particularly when you end up in a meeting with some of the people in the room and some of them joining virtually, I'd almost rather have everybody dial in and video in than that hybrid approach. And I think the kind of 2 to 3 days a week, does it then just end up with the 2 days that you've got to come into the office feeling like a chore? Or on the other hand, do people go, yeah, no, I love the fact that we can get together twice a week? I don't think there's an easy answer to that. It's a problem that everyone's trying to tackle at the moment, and some with different approaches to others. Even looking at some of those very large corporations who are going to, you're back in 5 days a week, to no, we'll carry on with a hybrid, to we'll fully remote. If I were to start a business tomorrow, I still think I might consider having an actual office. We do have an office, but we tend to convene there as a team fairly infrequently. It's great for hosting clients and potential investors and all of that, but I don't oblige people to go in at all. New business may very well consider doing it, and for 2 or 3 days a week, I think would take that approach. I just think it's so good to get round a table with people. Challenge you've got, of course, now is particularly in the tech business is getting those developers to come in because they really want to be remote.
Yep, I agree. I don't know what I would do in that situation because I keep toying around with, starting up another company. And then there's, so many issues to deal with. And then dealing with developers is probably, up there because if I were to do something again, it would be a tech company. And then, getting developers to come into an office 5 days a week, talk about a challenge.
I heard, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but or whether it's current, but it was a little while ago that if you had remote working as a tag on one of the employment sites, then you got 10 times more applicants from developers than if you didn't have that tag. That surprised me in terms of the that number, but doesn't surprise me in terms of it being significant, I'm sure. And I do get it, that whole train of thought thing and jumping on a train to commute to an office when actually it's a different thought process. I get it completely. But at the same time, I do think developers, 2 developers in a room dealing with a problem is probably going to be faster than 2 developers remotely dealing with a problem. I stand to be corrected, but that will be my view.
I couldn't agree more. When it came time to exit planning and more specifically integration planning with the acquiring company, in how many different instances were you part of the deal in terms of having to work for the acquirer? And in how many cases was your employment, completely ended when the transaction closed?
The former for all of them. Always been tied in one way or another. In fact, with one of the first telecoms business, the entire team was tied in. It was part of the contract because having made the acquisition, they weren't in a position to integrate the customer base. They got ahead of themselves a little bit. So we had to run the customer base for a period of time until they were ready to integrate products and map them correctly. That on paper should have been 6 months, ended up being closer to 18. Kind of suited as well because we were still in the telecom space. So that actually worked out. And we were doing entirely inbound at the point of acquisition. We just were able to switch through the non-competes in the agreement to providing outbound telephony services using the same engineers, the same everything, and also retaining some income from managing that client base through the transition. So in the end, again, don't always be too fearful about being locked in for a period of time. It gives you some economic stability. It's kind of okay. It's fine. And I think you'll get that email in when the time's right for you to move on anyway, just to say, look, thanks ever so much for your help, but you can start your gardening leave now.
No, I agree that email will come. I've heard a lot about those, and I've heard I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. I wanted to ensure that I was not part of whatever transaction was going to occur. So close to 3 years prior to an exit, I brought in a CEO to run the company on a day-to-day basis so that whoever acquired us understood that I was no longer an integral part of day-to-day operations. And that worked swimmingly for me. And I gave myself a lot of runway. So the advice I would give is there's nothing wrong with being part of the transaction. Like you said, there's a lot of benefits to that. If I were to do it again, I'd probably reconsider the approach that I took. But there also is a way to execute it so that you're not involved in the go-forward operation at all.
No, you're right, Stephen. You've reminded me, even with that one, I moved from the role of CEO or MD at that point into a chairman role. So I was still involved in areas like this, the lobbying and the overall strategic direction for the business. But the day-to-day operations, I promoted our ops director at the time into an MD role. So he took care of that, which again worked out well for both of us. I think he was ready to do it, and it gave him a really nice CV point on which to go on to his next job.
So tell us a little bit about Wonderful, your current company, and what it does.
Yeah, sure. This was an odd one. We got into this in a very circuitous route. Actually, back in 2016, running the telecoms business I was just talking about before, coincided with my son deciding to do a charity aeroplane jump. So he jumped out with his parachute to raise some money for a teenage cancer charity. He became super frustrated having done his jump by the amount of money that was being lost from his friends' very generous donations and family donations to the charity just along the way. And he'd done this using an online charity giving platform, created his event, got all his friends to come along and make a donation, and then found that through various different points of leakage, not all of the money was reaching the charity, whether that was the platform fees, whether it was deductions from tax incentives, gift aid, as is known in the UK for charities, or costs of processing the payments. Along the way, a fair chunk was going. He just was unaware of that. He felt it was fairly opaque, the whole process. And his I remember we should have all been talking about his jump earlier that day, and we actually all ended up talking about, that's not great. There's a load of money being lost there. What can we do to help? So we just decided, it was a time in my life, I think it was coming up to my 50th birthday. We got a 25th wedding anniversary, a couple of big birthdays for the kids as well. We said, let's take 2016 as a year to give back and do something. So I had some great engineers in the business, really good developers. We set up an online charity giving platform. We said 100% of anything that goes through will go to charity. We'll just kind of swallow any costs and see how it goes. That became quite a success, and we created almost that success paradox of, it's free, people love it, charities came on in big numbers, and then we found that we were having to cover a lot of payment processing costs through corporate sponsorship. So long story short, this is a very long-winded way of telling you the story, but long story short, we kind of really faced that problem head on in about 2020 as COVID struck. We ended up having to pause the platform because we were running telephone conferencing services with the same staff. And then we reopened it, solving the problem through something called open banking, which allowed us to remove all the debit cards and credit cards from that payment flow completely. And instead, the money went straight from the donor's account to the charity's account in kind of one tap with no intermediaries. That reduced the cost massively by like 95%. And it suddenly struck us that was a fantastic thing for wonderful.org, the fundraising platform, but also potentially a really great commercial opportunity because it felt that was a problem that existed everywhere. Anyone who's being paid is paying an awful lot, particularly if they're being paid by credit and debit card, just to get paid.
So is the requirement then for the organization receiving the donation to not accept credit cards and only accept ACH payments?
Through Wonderful.org, that's all we do. So we moved 100% to open banking transactions. That was kind of a prerequisite for our existence because it was either that or we just keep seeking larger and larger corporate sponsors, which again might have been possible, but was quite a time sap when it's a philanthropic venture, is just constantly going out and looking for new corporate sponsors. This alleviated the need for corporate sponsorship because effectively, certainly once we became authorized with the FCA in the UK, it removes that cost. Actually, from our point of view, completely. There is no direct cost for us to process an instant payment, an open banking payment. So that, I think, presented that, as I say, that raft of opportunities for us to think, how can we explore this and use the experience from previous businesses to develop something and deliver that into the small business sector? And that's what Wonderful does now. It provides open banking payment services, not only for 1,000 plus charities in the UK completely free of charge, but also for the small business sector.
Great. Well, congratulations on recognizing that need and scaling it to the level that you have so far.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a really nice space to be in. I think, so often we talk about businesses or technologies being disruptive, and I think genuinely open banking is disrupting a sector that's existed in a similar way for the last 60 years. We've been paid via credit cards in the UK. They were introduced into the UK when I was, literally. So, pretty much the same year. And it feels like we're ripe for some change.
So bringing this full circle, since you start companies with the end in mind, what is a potential exit, down the road for Wonderful?
I think this is one of the ones where we've started that with that in mind, and there are a number of opportunities in terms of exits, whether that's from one of the incumbents in the sector, some of the new providers that are larger than us and better funded. But the reality is this is one that we actually feel like we're going to be in for a fairly long haul. We've not been in a position, certainly from the business I've been involved in, probably 9 exits over the last 20 odd years, where I've personally raised money externally. It's all been organic, bootstrap, grown, profitable exit. This is one where I can see us going through a number of rounds because I think the opportunity is so vast. It will be kind of foolish to leave early. You think about the volume of payments that are being made every day. Think about exactly what your market is, and it is literally anybody who is being paid, which is any business. Whether that's point of sale on a piece of equipment in a retail environment, or it's an e-commerce, or it's on an invoice run. All of those can be facilitated through open banking. So it's actually one of those times where I'm going to contradict myself and say I'm not really thinking at this point about the exit. Of course, we're still doing all of those things and making sure all the paperwork's filed, but no immediate plans.
Okay, interesting. Well, good luck on the long run with this. It sounds like it's going to be the exception to all of your others.
Fingers crossed.
So speaking about the exception, you have a very interesting way of living in terms of splitting your time in 2 different countries. Tell me about how that came about, and you currently split your time between Spain and the UK. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, partly because my wife's Spanish, so we've been planning to do this for a while. But bizarrely, she probably prefers to be in England more than I do these days. So having been there for a long time, that's her home and mine's in the sunshine. Shouldn't say that at the moment. We've had 2 weeks of straight rain in Spain. It's been awful, but hopefully it'll pass soon. No, it works out very well. It's not been always we've done it. We've spent some periods of time abroad, actually specifically for jobs. So I was in the Middle East for a while, running a training institute back in the late 90s. We were in Madrid for a while when one of the businesses was acquired by VeriSign. We ran the European operation for VeriSign for a little while. And recently we started doing this split between the UK and Spain. I just find it works really, really well. I think helped by remote working and the fact that so many of my calls will be video-based anyway. But I think also the style of work that I can get done in Spain differs from the kind of work that I might do in the UK. So we're in Shoreditch, I'm back in London. It tends to be meeting after meeting, in person, flitting around, meeting potential investors or clients or whatever in the offices, and then back to Spain, and it's head down for more project-based work. And I can do that with fewer distractions, which is good, far less commuting. And I think even the weather lends itself more to being outdoors and doing a bit of running and that kind of thing as well.
Sure. So that's one of your hobbies, running?
Yeah, no, I love running. Absolutely. That for me is the biggest stress relief that I can find. That, and I combine the running more recently with yoga as well, which I think is just good for stretching out those muscles after a run. You're a runner too, though.
I am addicted to running. I love marathons. I've done several ultra marathons. The longest I've attempted was a 100-mile race, which unfortunately I took a DNF, did not finish, because I got lost at mile 38. Because I got so into the audiobook that I was listening to. It became so inspirational that I missed a turn off, because ultra marathons are on trails typically, and they're like these little shiny flags that the organizers hang to where you should turn, and I missed one. And I didn't realize that I was off track for about 4 miles. So I doubled back 4 miles. And by the time I made that turn and approached the next aid station, I had missed a cutoff time for that specific aid station. So my 100-miler ended at around mile 38.
That ought to be a comment that's in the author's blurb on the book going forward. This book's so engaging. Steve didn't complete his ultramarathon as a result of listening to it.
It was David Goggins. For those of you who know who David Goggins is, I mean, he's this incredible ultra athlete, former Navy SEAL, former Green Beret, former military, everything, who now competes in these crazy events, and he just has this incredible approach to life. And he just got me so pumped, because I was tired, right? At that point, I had just finished the single marathon mark, and I was getting tired, which is why I put on the audiobook for a little bit of extra motivation. I got so motivated that I stopped paying attention to where I should be turning.
Wow. No, I've not done anything like that. I mean, marathon's my longest distance and probably will always be. Even those people where it says go the extra mile, I think New York does that every year, that you can run an additional mile for charity. And I just think, wow. I'm impressed by anybody who finds the energy to do that.
26 is plenty. There's no reason to go on extra miles.
Absolutely. Those for me, it's been New York's the only marathon I've done. I've done that 3 times now, and that once you hit Central Park, I'm done. Like that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any plans on doing New York again?
Yeah, definitely. I did it for, I think the first time I'd have been mid-30s, I think, and I did it for my 50th again a couple of years ago, and I'm planning on doing it my 60th, which will be next year.
Oh, fantastic. Well, definitely drop me a note because I plan on doing it at least 2 more times because I want to hit 10. So I've done it 8 times already, and I still have not broken my goal of 4 hours. I've come close. I've come to like 4 hours and 11 minutes, but I've got this like internal goal that I want to hit 4 hours before it's too late. So let me know when you do it. I may sign up with you.
Definitely. Keep in touch over that.
Yeah. Kieron, thank you so much for being on the show today. You have a wealth of knowledge, obviously, from a startup and an exit perspective. You've been there, done that multiple times. If anybody has any questions for you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Probably LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/in/Kieron James, or via the website. If you drop an email to hello@wonderful.co.uk and just mention my name in there, say you've been listening to the podcast, I'll be very sure to respond.
Oh, fantastic. We'll definitely drop that in the show notes. Thank you so much again for joining the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Steve. My pleasure entirely.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of the Built to Finish podcast. If you've liked this episode, please do like and comment and subscribe. It really does help the show a lot and helps me get great guests like Kieron onto the show. And also, if you found any information shared today useful to somebody in your network, please do share this episode with them. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Accresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.